So what is the historical precedent for this? Do you have stories that you're able to go back to in the history books and be like, this happened before and this is how they handled it?
Yeah, this is compared to the Great Mouse Plague of 1984. But people have now started to say that this is worse, and it's also lasted longer than that one. But during the 1984 mouse plague, there's some old vision of a guy walking around with a flamethrower, and the floor was just carpeted in mice, and you couldn't see anything else. And he was using a flamethrower to try and control them, which isn't being used this time. That's heavily frowned upon. It looked like that scene from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It was pretty awful. But what we've heard about mouse plagues in the past is they end with disease. So it's not the cold or the rain like people keep saying, but it's disease, and they actually end quite quickly. And experts have said to me they've actually had farmers call and say, my mice have disappeared. They were here yesterday and now they're, where have my mice gone? So a lot of the time they die in their burrows, or, something happens that comes through and just completely wipes them out. So the state government of the state that I live in, New South Wales, they're working on research with scientists for a biological control. So they're saying it won't help this mouse plague, but hopefully for future mouse plagues, something can be done to either stop them breeding. Peter also suggested that people should be spreading contraceptives for mice rather than poison. So that went down as well as can be expected as well. But actually looking at what we can do to, on a biological level, stop a mouse plague if that's spreading a disease or doing something to stop them. But at this point, there's very little. They actually looked, the state government, at introducing a poison called bromidilone. At the moment, people have been using zinc phosphide on an agricultural level around their crops. And already, despite using zinc phosphide extensively, lots of people have already reported huge crop losses. So it's July now. People sowed in around April, May. And, within a month or two, just as soon as it germinated, even if they'd reported seeing less mice around, they appeared when a crop came through. So whether they came out from pasture paddocks or if they came out from, underground, they came up and they've already ruined, for some people, 100% crop losses. And that's even with aerial baiting and zinc phosphide being spread, multiple times. That's just, it hasn't done the work. So bromidilone was suggested. There was an urgent application put forward to the Poisons Authority by the government. And what was surprising to the government was most people actually said, we don't want this poison because it's got a high secondary killing rate, whereas zinc phosphide turns into a gas and then the mouse isn't dangerous or as dangerous for other animals that then eat them. Bromidilone basically would turn the mice that eat it into a moving or dead, another poison, another bait. So there are really high killing rates, and that could be for wildlife. And we know that going through the drought, there's been so much death and decimation of lots of native wildlife species. They could be for birds. We've seen so many owls around at the moment and lots of birds that could then suffer from eating mice. But even fish, there's been some absolutely incredible videos of native fish. We've got native fish called Murray cod, and they've got mice in their stomachs because mice are actually a really big part of their diet, which I never knew and has definitely changed my approach to eating fish. But mice can tread water for 10 to 12 hours. They can swim through a river and they've been eaten by fish. And the worry from people was, what if we introduce this new really poisonous toxin into the environment? The minister who suggested it described it as napalm for mice. What if we introduce that and then we see decimated species, whether it's in the air, on the ground, or in the water?
So you're a reporter. Are you so up on these issues because of your work, or is everyone around you now become a mouse expert because it's so prevalent?
Yeah, I mean, even people in the cities have been very focused on this too, because it's the scale of it is just amazing. People's stories, the fact that their, kids' uniforms have been eaten, they've gone to dress their kids for school and there's just big holes. It's on every single level. So it has also been very interesting that people have been so engaged on it on an ecological level as well, and wanting to know, if we introduce poisons to try get rid of mice, what does that do to the rest of the food chain? If we introduce it and then you eat the fish that's eaten the mouse, it's like, what does that do? What are the risks? So lots of people have been engaged and wanting to know the solution, but also knowing that there's no silver bullet to stop or fix a mouse plague.
And are people getting along better during this? Hey, we're all in this together? Or do you see this being a divisive issue where people are really torn about how to handle it or how big the problem is?
I think it's like any other stressful situation where, we've gone through drought and then COVID and then this. And for a lot of people, this is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back, because you struggle with your business, whether it's an agricultural business or a business in town, because we know that if farmers are struggling, then the businesses in town are struggling. This is like, what next? This is just another thing that people have to deal with. So there are definitely some people that were saying, I know that this poison could do a lot of damage to the environment, but we're desperate. We're absolutely desperate, and we need something, and there's nothing strong enough. So people are mostly quite united, but there is definitely, for a lot of people, that real sense of desperation. There's the mental health impacts of not being able to escape it. It's during the day, it's you go shopping, you try to go to sleep, you go to the kitchen and there's mouse poo through all your pots and pans, all your food's been eaten. This
is happening for you. You are dealing with this too in your own house?
My house is much better now, but it started off, so I had a big issue, and lots of the time, so winter you don't see them as much, like I mentioned, and that's even in your houses because they go in for warm, dry areas. And luckily we're having quite a wet winter, which just means that you're not seeing them as much. But they were running around. I was doing an interview with Irish radio and I yelled in the middle of it because a mouse ran out. But I started off with this phobia where I'd sweat and just my hands would shake. And
you legit had a phobia about it?
Oh, absolutely. But then it's just this complete immersion in them. I had to film them at one point because I'm a video journalist, and I was trying to film them in that supermarket where they were running around because I kept screaming and throwing the camera up, and I had a little crowd of people watching me because they thought I was so funny. But it has improved because I hear them scratching up my bed head now sometimes, and you just roll over and go back to sleep because you just... or you're lying in bed and you hear a snap of the trap, or you hear them running around in a plastic trap, and so it's pretty awful. But I particularly feel for my friends with children because and there's poison around, and so in Australia there is a national shortage of the antidote for dogs and pets that have eaten mouse baits, because there's so much that have already been used because all these animals have been poisoned. So, it's just an absolutely devastating situation.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell so you always get notified about this podcast. And if you're really interested in conversations like this, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. To find out more, go to network.articulate.ventures.